Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing? I hope you're doing better than me. Uh, by age, you can't be doing too well. Not as well as when you were 20, 25, right? I want to remind people we have a little conference going on, the 8th Rational Physics Conference. That's going to be in Zambia. Here's the little uh, propaganda, little commercial, okay? And it's hosted by my good friend Shamu, and hopefully there's some beer down there. And I know he's going to be there. Another good friend, Dave, he's probably going to be there, and they're pretty good independent thinkers. Doesn't mean we all agree. We fight for every drop of beer. Believe me. It's just that we get together and we hash things out. Especially they like to talk about the extinction. That's where we really get into fist fights. Okay, so it's good. If you want to have good discussions, you go down there, Zambia. Okay, and that's going to be what, January, February. Okay, what am I going to talk about today? Well, I'm going to talk about Ken Wheeler, and he's a guy who's on the internet who published a book, 2014. I started talking about him the other day, and I'm going to talk a little more about him today. And someone put a comment, let me put that comment up here, okay? And he said, please stop attacking Ken Wheeler. Get on with science, please, okay? Um, there's a couple answers to that, okay? On the one hand, he's totally right, or at least in my opinion, right? Uh, and I'm already on record. Science is not about criticizing. Let's make that absolutely clear. Science is not about criticizing. Science is about explaining. Physics is about explaining phenomena, mechanisms. You have to explain causes. And you can only explain causes if you have physical objects. Okay? So that's a starting point, at least from my point of view. Is science just criticizing? Well, no. In fact, I had a discussion some time back with a fellow, and he said, I don't need to tell you my theory. I can just rationally, logically debunk yours. I can show that yours falls because it lacks merits or rationality or logic or whatever. I don't need to show you my cards. No, that doesn't occur in science. That might be true in a card game. Some card games, you don't have to show your cards. You can just go to the deck. Not in science. Science, you have a conference. And a conference is a dialogue or a trialogue or a multilogue. Everybody who comes in there has to present his case. Okay? Now, why is that? Well, imagine a guy comes to the conference. He says, well, I just came here to criticize your theory. That's all I want to do. And then I leave. Well, there's a couple problems with that. The first one is that, obviously, even if he's successful, right, um, he's already got a different way of thinking. The fact that he's criticizing my theory, right, or your theory for that matter, means that he's got a different way of thinking. So why won't he present his theory? Is he afraid that people will laugh at his theory or think of it even worse than the one he's criticizing? I mean, he could criticize a point and he might win that point, say, okay, we didn't think about that, you're right, it fails here, or we can't answer it yet. That could be true. The rest of the theory could be okay for all we care. What do you have to propose in exchange? And the guy says, well, no, I'm not going to tell you my theory. I don't have to. And that doesn't occur in science. And the reason is that the doors are locked of the conference room. They're locked. Nobody can get out. We can't get out until we fix the problem of the universe. We need to figure out how the universe works. And so if my theory or your theory doesn't work, this guy can't come in there and say, I just came here to criticize. No, no way. You debunked our theories, great. Ours are destroyed. They're no good. What do you have to propose? How does the universe work? And you can't say, oh, I'm not going to tell you my theory. I just want to leave. No, not in science. So, yeah, science is not about criticizing. Science is about proposing. It's about explaining how the universe works. In the case of physics, right? Because as I put science, we have two branches. One is philosophy, the other one's physics. Philosophy deals with concepts, purpose, and reason. Why someone did something. Why did Napoleon go to Waterloo? That's a scientific question. And people, throw theories. You can say they're opinions. Yeah, they're opinions, but they're theories. One guy says he went there to steal. The other guy says he wanted glory. So everybody's got his own theory, and that's scientific because they're giving you an explanation for why Napoleon went to Waterloo. Physics deals with causes, mechanisms, and obviously, in order to explain it, you have to mediate them with objects. Okay? And so science is about explaining, and we can't leave the conference room until we explain how the universe works. That's the first aspect of, answer to that question, to, get on with science, stop criticizing. Yeah, criticizing is not science. Granted, conceded, no problem. The other issue, and for this I'm going to have to start here with a definition of a famous word that I like to use. I like to use until today. Now I have to change it, unfortunately, but that's where I start, okay? Okay, and what you have is this. It's the word idiot. And if you look it up, it says informal, an utterly foolish or senseless person. Psychology, parenthesis, it says no longer in technical use considered offensive. And then it says a person of the lowest order in a former and discarded classification of mental retardation, having a mental age of less than 3 years old and an intelligence quotient under 25. That was a technical term. They stopped using it because they considered it offensive. Down at the bottom, and you see all the synonyms there, okay, fine. Down at the bottom, you see the Wikipedia version of this. It says, was formerly a legal and psychiatric category of profound intellectual disability in which a person's mental age is 2 years or less. The term is now archaic and offensive and was replaced by the term profound mental retardation, which has itself since been replaced by other terms. Okay, I don't know what it has been replaced by. All I can tell you is here's my version of it. I replaced it for the purposes of physics with a similar term, and I called it idiot with an E. Okay. And the word idiot, right? I guess you can pronounce it the same way, refers to an individual who proposes ancient, big ideas. That's where the E comes from, and thinks of and presents them as new. That's one aspect of it. It's also an individual who theorizes that concepts move, abstractions that he or she mistakes for objects. And on the right there, you see examples of concepts that profoundly mentally retarded patients typically confused with objects. In other words, vortex, plasma, black hole, wave, field, energy, dark matter, spirit, conscience, mass, negative, positive particles, soul, current, ether, force, time, charge, wave packet, wave functions, space-time singularity, electricity. It's not limited to those, but those are the primary ones. Okay? So anyone using any of these words to push a theory is a, what is it called? A profoundly mentally retarded individual. Okay? He has stepped over the line into the asylum. Okay? So since I can't use the word anymore, I can't use the word idiot because it's offensive, I'm going to use that term, which apparently is acceptable, profoundly, profoundly mentally retarded. Okay, so that's what these people are. Anyone using those terms, any of those terms, to push a theory is a profoundly mentally retarded individual. Okay? And so what's the issue? The issue is that we do have to produce a contrast. That's why I criticize. That's why I introduce criticism, not because it's science, but because 99% of the people out there have no idea what the issues are. They see someone like me attacking the mainstream, And they say, oh, another dissident. And they say, oh, he's just like the Electric Universe. He's like there's another group, David Hiltzer's and his family's group. It's known today as the John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society. They criticize the establishment. Ken Wheeler, guy I'm going to talk about today, talked about the other day, he criticized the establishment. And you have a whole host of people out there, everybody doing their own thing, everybody criticizing the establishment. What's the problem? The problem is that, all these people, there's a lot of intelligent people, lay people out there, people who don't have degrees in physics, okay? And they are somewhat interested in the subject matter. They're not experts. They read maybe a little bit of the literature, maybe they read blogs, they read articles, and they're more or less in tune with what's going on in the world of so-called physics. So what do they read? Well, they read black holes, they read Big Bang creationism, they read space-time, four-dimensional space-time, unimaginable, And they say, something's wrong with all this. This is all nonsense. This is all idiocy. Particles that go backwards in time. What is this? And so these people realize that it's all bunk, that's all irrationality that's out there. And so what do? They feel powerless. They look at this world of mathematical physics and they say it's all idiocy, it's all nonsense. Profoundly mentally retarded. Okay, and so they look for an alternative. Okay, they look for an alternative. They say, well, let's see. I want to see if there's anything else out there. And they go out there and they find people like the Electric Universe, or they find people like the John Chappell Society, or Ken Wheeler or whatever. They find all these people in groups out there and they say, oh, this guy thinks like me. He's against the establishment. And I come around and a lot of people say, oh, here's another Disney. He's against the establishment. So they're all the same. And I can only put it into context with a little joke that's been around for years. Colonel approaches the soldier who's got this spyglass. Says, soldier, what do you see out there? Colonel, we got thousands of Indians. They're coming towards us. Thousands of Indians? Yeah, thousands of Indians. Are they friends? Yes, I think they are. How do you know? Because they're all coming together. And that's more or less the situation here. The fact that we all come together and attack the mainstream doesn't make us intellectual friends. We're not, by a long shot, intellectual friends. A lot of people say, why don't you join up with the Electric Universe and with all these other people out there, the John Chappell Society and so on, and, work together to attack the mainstream. No way. No way. My biggest enemies are the electrical universe. My biggest enemies are people, intellectual enemies, by the way. I don't put bombs in people's homes, not anymore at least. My biggest enemies are people like the John Chappell, everyone in there, 150% of the people who are in there. And by the way, I'm a member of the John Chappell Society. I became a member like 10 years ago or so. Someone invited me, I went in there, put my stuff, many to have links, and I show up as a dissident in there, in the group. And I could have come out of there, and I should have, but the only reason I stay in there is because every week, every Saturday, they have like a transmission, and there's always a speaker. And usually I contact these people and tell them what I think of their theory. And usually they are profoundly mentally retarded theories. Okay? And so that's the only reason I stay around there. Otherwise, I have nothing to do with the John Chappell Society. Now, there's one, and the reason I bring this up is one fellow who belongs to the John Chappell Society. He wrote a book. He wrote a book in which he collected all the dissidents in the world. And he put them in this book. He says, look, here we have all these people who rail against and rant against the establishment. And he put everybody in there together, and I'm in there simply because I belong to what used to be the world science. Then they had some kind of problem between them, and the Hilster family came out and they created their own John Chapel Society. Okay, that's what happened. I don't know really all the details, but they created this group, and I ended up with because I was in the database. I ended up with the John Chapel group. Okay, so you'll find my name in there. This fellow, he wrote a book listing all the dissidents in the world, and he included my name in there. Of course, he put a very brief description of what I stood for, and it's all idiocy. It's what is it? Profoundly mentally. I'm old, so these things take time to sink in. What he said about me was nonsense. Obviously, he had no idea what I stood for or what I represented. And that is the problem. The problem is that a lot of people who listen to me, they say, oh, Bill's just another dissident. He's like the Electric Universe. He's like, Ken Wheeler. He's like Dave Hilster in his, John Chapel Society. And so I want to make sure that these people that everybody knows that these people are my biggest enemies. Why are they my biggest enemies? Because all these intelligent, rational laymen out there who are seeking for an alternative to mathematical physics, to the nonsense they hear out there, say, well, who's out there? Who complains against it? And they find, the Electric Universe, they find the John Chapel Society, say, oh, I like this group. These guys think like me. And that's why. Because these people are the same profoundly mentally retarded individuals as the mainstream. There's no difference between any of them. What is different about me? I'm the first person on planet Earth that works with objects. I define the foundations of physics for the first time in history. No one has ever defined the foundations of physics. You ask any of these guys, what is physics? And they'll give you all kinds of nonsense answers. And I start with a golden principle. Physics cannot be done with objects. You need an object to do physics. You can't mediate it with concepts. That's where I draw the line. And that's hard for people to understand because they say, well, I do with objects. And they don't. They don't even realize that much. And here, let me show you a couple examples. One is this fellow who created this book. And his name is John de Clement. I think he's Canadian, or at least he's based in Canada. He speaks like 4 languages. He always translates all his stuff in 4 languages, which is not bad, And that's his book there, one of his books, The Worldwide List of Alternative Theories and Critics. Okay? And he puts me in there and he says this, Fluid Ether Descartes. Is he kidding me? Is he really kidding me? And what's the kind of particle that I propose? Pair-linked. So yeah, anyone who just looks at this, just that little snapshot, says, oh, Bill's just another dissident who proposes some kind of particle, and some kind of ether, and some kind of, and he follows Descartes and who knows what. That's the impression people get for just by looking at that. Well, John de Clement, he wrote a letter to me some time ago. He's asking me to look at his video, and that's the link for his video. And I didn't look at it because I already knew what he stood for in general terms. And just a couple days ago, 2-3 days ago, someone puts that same video and copies me saying, oh, look, there's a new ether. And I said, well, I better look at this because I'm dealing with ether here on my channel, so I might as well look at it and see what the new vision is. And you go in there and under the video description, it says, the video presents a new vision of the ether. And it's made possible the Kleinman's experiment, of course, right? So I listened to the video, and this is what you see in there, or what you hear in there. Particles of space stir in all directions to form a kind of fluid. They are the medium of the space. The second is that they propagate waves as in all fluids. And I said, what in the world? This is the new ether? It looks to me just like the old ether, What was the old ether? A bunch of particles that, vibrate, and that's the wave. That's And this guy's proposing exactly the same thing. He's saying the ether, in other words, I don't care what the ether does. That's not a new version of the ether. I want to know what the ether is before anybody waves or moves it. And what is it? It's a bunch of particles. So he hasn't told us what the ether is, what encapsulates each particle, what's outside of the ether, if anything, or if the ether is infinite. Those are the issues you got to deal with first. You can't just move on and say, this is the ether, and let me show you what it does. Now, so what do we call a person who brings an old idea and presents it as new? Well, he's known as a, profoundly mentally retarded individual. I don't want to offend anyone. That's why I use the technical, psychological, psychiatric term to make sure that, I'm legal here, okay? Okay, is he the only one? Well, no, we have another, profoundly mentally retarded individual, and he is this gentleman here, Wallace Thornhill. He's the head of the Electric Universe or Thunderbolts group, whatever. And he goes in there and he says, we live in an electric universe. And you can see the word electric and electricity throughout his profile on LinkedIn. Okay, in fact, it goes further because he makes a comment. It was put in one of the Thunderbolts or Electric, I think it was the Thunderbolts, and I quoted part of it. And I wanted to put it in for today, and I couldn't find it anymore. They took it out. And I think they took it out because I criticized that. Look, this is what these guys are saying. And so the guy there, I think, removed it because of that, because he had the quote by Wal Thornhill, and the only thing he changed was that. He took that out. So I don't know why, but it just gives me a feeling that he didn't like my criticism of it. Anyways, I can't find it anymore. I can't find the exact textual thing that Wal Thornhill said, but I found something very similar in a buddy of his in a book that this guy wrote, and which Wal Thornhill, is one of the commentators, one of the guys who vouches for his book. And this is the comment. It looks something like this because I don't have the exact comment anymore. And it says, this is Tom Finley, a beginner's view of our electric universe. And this is backed by Wal Thornhill. He says, the universe's power network adorned throughout with galaxies and stars as if they were Christmas tree lights strung on wires. What are they referring to, or what is this fellow referring to? I put that on the bottom right there, and those are the filaments. Everything is interconnected like lights on a Christmas tree. That's what Thornhill says, vouches for, etc. And so what's the problem? Well, what's the problem is that you say, okay, so what is your definition of electricity? I mean, if it's going to be called the electric universe, hopefully as a minimum you define the word electric or electricity or some of those derivatives, right? So this is the official version of electricity according to the electric universe, okay? This is the scientific definition, okay? And you'll find it on the website. You can look it up there. And it says the following. It says electricity, which we define as the flow of electric charge, travels through a circuit continuously. So we have the flow of electric charge traveling. The flow is flowing. The flow is traveling. Below that, electromagnetic energy flows. Energy flows. Energy is a concept. What did we say of all these people? A person who uses the word energy is a profoundly mentally retarded individual. Needs to be locked up. Men with the white jackets are coming after you. Electricity moves. What do you mean electricity moves? I thought electricity was the flow, and now electricity moves. Carriers of electrical energy. And they go on, with all this nonsense. But the interesting thing is that he says at the beginning there, it's impossible to define these words because it lies at the bottom of the lexical well. So they don't define electricity, even though they're called the electric universe. They're just in there now to make money and to get more people recruited. That's all it is. And so what are all these groups doing? They're taking rational people out there, lots of rational people out there, lay people who say, I hate the establishment. What is there in the alternative? And they go and they join these groups and they say, oh, I like this because these guys rail against the establishment. The criticism is okay. It's the science that's lacking. And I need to establish a contrast between what I do and what all these, I have to look this up also, profoundly mentally retarded people and groups. Yes, I'm a different, I propose something different, and I'm not going to join these people to rail against the establishment. First, I got to get rid of these people. I want to make sure people understand that these guys are profoundly mentally retarded individuals. They have profoundly mentally retarded theories. And that's the people we have to attack so that people understand the contrast between what I'm proposing, what all these profoundly mentally retarded people offer. That's the issue. And right now, people can't see that clearly. They think I'm just another dissident just like these other guys. That's the problem. Okay? And of course, we have Mr. Wheeler, and he is another one who follows in the boots of these people. He says, magnetic attraction absolutely does not exist whatsoever. He goes on there and he says negative momentum particles and countless other things that do not exist. He talks about exist. He talks about objects. He talks about physical objects and existing. Never once does he define the word object or the word exist. You have no idea what it means. And this is out of his book. So, yeah, and what do we call a person who doesn't define words or who introduces math into physics or who talks about doing experiments without explaining them? We call them a profoundly mentally retarded individual. He should not be in physics. These people should not be in physics. None of them. So they're all my enemies. Just like the Indians, just the fact that we're all together doesn't make us, intellectual friends. Okay, here I synthesize for you the exactly what I'm objecting to from all these groups, all of them, mainstream and all these dissidents, all of them, 100% of the dissidents out there. There's not one so-called physicist, researcher, whatever he calls himself, engineer, who does physics with objects on planet Earth. I'm the only one. There is no other one. I use objects. And this is just the synthesis here. And you see the three main points that I've got them. They don't define their strategic words, their terms, those that make or break their theories. They use words of mainstream. That's the worst probably violation. They move concepts around. Energy, field, wave, plasma, current, vortex, ether. Anyone using those words is what do we call him? A profoundly mentally retarded individual. He should not be in physics. He's not a scientist. He's a religious fanatic. And the other issue is they think that space is made of something. Usually, I think 100% of the people out there think that space is made of something. And the reason they think it's made of something is they never define the word nothing. No one can define the word nothing. And yeah, like a couple people told me, they said, there's no such thing as nothing. And literally, yeah, they're correct. But you know what they mean. They mean the opposite. They mean that there's nothing you can designate. There's no word you can designate or thing out there or entity or medium out there that you can designate and say that's nothing. And of course you can't, because nothing is that which doesn't have shape, whereas something is that which does. Now we can use these words consistently, scientifically. Until you define those words, you cannot use them consistently. And these people have never defined nothing. They say, well, what is nothing? Well, it's the absence of matter. In other words, they're saying it's not something. And that's not the definition of nothing. That's not the definition of space. It's not the definition of vacuum. All these words are synonyms. Space, vacuum, nothing, they're all synonyms, and they mean that which has no shape. Okay? And that definition now allows us to use it consistently in physics. And physics is done with what? Not with nothing. We don't do physics with nothing. If we take all the matter out of the universe, we have nothing. And we can't do physics. You have to do physics with something. And what they've done is turn nothing into something. They all put ether in there. They either put energy in there, excited fields, particles, negative and positive, that come in whenever they want. The wish of the at the urging of the mathematical magic wand. They built nothing with something. So there is no such thing as nothing in their world. That's the problem. Okay? And yes, universe, the word universe means something and nothing. Nothing is space. Something is all the atoms interconnected, in my theory, by the electromagnetic ropes. And that's another thing, that people don't understand. They say, what do you mean you do physics with objects? And they do it with concepts. Yeah. This is what I do physics with. You see this? It's called a rope. DNA, whatever you want to call this. Look at the structure. at the architecture. That's all you got to look at. I'm not saying it's this rope. I'm saying this is a rope. This is what I do physics with. This is what I do light with. This is what I do gravity with. This is what I do all invisible phenomena with. I'm saying every atom in the universe is connected by a physical rope. Okay, two twined threads. Is this an object? It's an object because it has shape. That which has shape. And let me prove it to you. I mean, you want proof. Everyone wants evidence, proof, etc. Okay, I'll prove it to you. You go to the hardware store and you say, sell me a rope. You give them some money and they give you something similar to this. Go to the hardware store now, again, and ask them for a field. Let's see what they give you. Or ask them for a vortex, like the, like the fractal lady. She does it with vortices. What did he give you, a tornado? Here's your tornado, sir. Take it home with you. Just don't let it bring down your house. So yes, they do physics, so-called physics, quotations, with concepts. They do it with energy. They do it with field. You say, oh, we do it with particles. Oh, particles, you mean those little corpuscles, those little beads? Oh, no, it's each particle, each corpuscle is not a classical one. It's a vibrating field. It's an excited field. And what is an excited field? Well, if you look up the word field, it's a bunch of numbers. So they're exciting numbers. They're moving numbers and units around. That's all a field is. A field is a word we use to designate values, magnitudes around an object. They usually get weaker and weaker, farther away from the object. A magnetic field gets weaker, farther away from the magnet. A gravitational field gets weaker, farther away from the earth, and so on. So the numbers get weaker. And what they're saying is these numbers are vibrating. They're excited. They're undulating or whatever. And so they're doing it with all with concepts. Electric universe, they do it with plasma. They do it with electricity. They call it, we're doing it with object. No, you're not. Electricity is a concept. So is plasma. And people say, what do you mean plasma? What do you mean electricity is a concept? You want to know if it's an object? Stick your fingers in the outlet and you'll see if it's an object. They're profoundly mentally retarded. That's what they are. They should be locked up in an asylum. Electricity, we don't prove it. We don't prove the definition of objects by sticking our fingers in the outlet. If they want to do that, they can go ahead. That's fine. That's the way they prove it in the electric universe. They can go ahead. In science, we define the word object. That's how we do it in science. Once you define the word object, that which has shape, now you know what it means. And does electricity have shape? Well, again, go to the hardware store and ask them for, them to give you just electricity. Not the wire, not the battery, none of that. Ask them for electricity. See if they can give it to you. Or they might say, well, I pay for energy, a concept. I pay for electricity every month. You're paying for a service, not for a good. You're not paying for a physical object. You're paying for a service that they deliver. What is this delivery? Well, if you go with a rope model, all you're receiving is a torsion. That's what you're receiving, torsions. And that makes all your appliances run. So you're not receiving a physical object. What you're receiving is a mechanism, something that's moving, not the something, but the moving. And it's very hard for people to wrap their heads around this. So yeah, my stuff is a little different than the electric universe and all these, I keep forgetting, the profoundly mentally retarded. And I do this so that I don't offend them. I don't want to offend anyone here, okay? Okay, so let's get on with Mr. Wheeler. I started the other day, I said, well, what Wheeler does is he stole some stuff from me, and I don't mind that absolutely at all. In fact, I thank him that he didn't mention me, because otherwise people might associate me with him. And he took that from my video number 6. It says, you will recognize a relativist because he either asks you for your credentials or volunteers his without asking. Okay, he took that one out. He took this one. I'll just go through them real quick. Physics is the science of existence. And again, Wheeler never defined the word exist or existence, so he has no justification to say that. He took that right out of my book and right out of my video there, where I say exactly the same words. But I do have a reason to say it, because I do define the word existence. I do define the word exist and existence, and I say they're related to the word object. So I do have a reason for saying that. He doesn't. He just put it in the book because he liked how it sounded. Okay. Okay, and here you have a couple more. He took these out of there as well, and he goes in there and he says, field a region of space, and I like the fact that he quoted it, region a portion of space, the infinite extension of field, and he says a region is not equivalent to the thing occupying the region itself. He took those directly out of my book, pages 287, 289. Okay, so he took the stuff out, and yeah, like I say, I'm glad he did not give me credit for it, because if he did, people would have associated with me. I mean, he quoted everybody else. He said this was said by Tesla, this was said by Dullard, and all these other people. He didn't quote me at all. Okay, and this he took directly a picture that's in his book. That's directly out of my number 8 video, What Does an Atom Look Like? As you can see, the dates. He published his book 2014. I put this out in 2008. And then another picture, and here this one he took out of video number 10, Why Can't You Draw an Atom? Okay, and again, you see these in his book. Am I upset? No, not at all. In fact, you can say that flattery it's the best form of flattery, plagiarism. So, no, I'm not upset at all. In fact, I enjoy the fact that he liked it and then he put it in his book. And I'm also glad that he gave me credit for it. But it just shows you what kind of individual he is. Okay, that's what it does. Because you would think that he would contact me if he's going to put so much material, and I think he's got more. I just haven't gone through the whole book. But he probably has more material, more stuff that he pulled out of my book. He bought my book just before he put his out. Okay, and he included it in his book. Fine, okay, fine. If he enjoyed it or helped his book, more power to him. I have no problem. I'm not going to sue him for $1 million, even if he becomes $1 million. So he doesn't have to worry about it. But here you see another aspect of Wheeler, and that's at the beginning of his book, by the way. Okay, and he says the following. He says, you can see he's got this self-aggrandizing attitude, where he said, the world's first accurate explanation, as illuminated in this work, all my accurate conclusions, empirical validity after the fact of my discovery, prove my theory accurate. He does a lot of kudos on himself, he pats himself in the back quite a bit. Okay. And so, yeah, it just shows what kind of individual he is, and you can see him on YouTube. You can get an idea of, how he, salud, beer. You can see how he teaches or how he does his stuff. Now, one thing he does good is he does experiments. And that's good. There's nothing wrong with doing experiments. That's what a lot of people go see him for. And another thing that people go see him for, which I forgot to mention last time, I was very much aware of it, is that he's into photography and he's also into Buddhism. And so he might have a lot of followers because of those branches, and that's fine. I don't even know what he does in that world. I don't care about photography or Buddhism, even though I studied Buddhism in college as well. I took yoga just to find out a little more about the religion and so on. And because it's good for the bones. Okay, so where did I start the other day? Well, I started with him giving an explanation, so-called explanation, of magnetism. Okay, and he starts with, well, this is his second video, but it says, he labels all this. This is centripetal, this is inertial. He goes in there and he says counterspatial, okay, and he labels these things. Okay, he says, he shows you the picture. And he says it's like the flywheel of a gyroscope. The flywheel is the thing that turns, okay? Okay, so he labeled these things. He did not explain up to that point. And you would think the next thing he does is, because it's okay. You label things, you say, look, this is A, this is B, this is C, and this is D. Fine, no problem. And now you would think that the next step is, let me explain to you what this does or how it works or whatever. No, the next thing he does is he erases the board. And then he does it again. He does it 3 times in his video. And he goes to the experiment, and then he draws it, he labels, and then he raises and does it again. He does that 3 times. Video number 2. Watch it yourself. Don't take my word for it. He never explains. He described, but even his descriptions are bunk. Why? Because he never defines these terms. Not only he doesn't define them online, he doesn't define them in his book. So I went to his book to find out if, what these words mean to him at least, because you would think that if I'm going to follow his presentation, as a minimum, I have to understand his language. Okay, so I go to his book, and this is what I find. He starts out by saying, it is impossible to understand the most fundamental ether modality of dielectricity without a firm grasp of counter space. And he goes into talking about counter space and dielectric and ether and energy, all these words. And so I said, well, I'm going to look them up, see what these words mean within his book, within the context of his book. I think that's a good way, to start any book. And especially when he goes into and he states, and I think that, this was in his video. He states in red there how he's going to explain all this. He says, these imagine trillions of little gyroscopes, and then he says what happens is all those trillions and trillions of ferrous magneto-dielectric geometries line up. Line up just means, okay, they form a line. So far we have a description. We have no idea how this is done, okay, what the mechanism is. What we have is a perfect field incommensurability, where magnetism is conjugated, and the entire magnetic mass is acting in unison. That's also a description. So even if you knew what those words mean, all you have is a description. And at the end he says, so I hope you understand things a little bit better now. Great. And so, what I did was I went to his book and I said, okay, what do these words mean? Let's look them up. And the first thing I do in his case is I look up the word count, because then you can get a ballpark figure of what his favorite words are, how he's going to use them, okay? And here's his famous word count, okay? Mass, that word belongs to the establishment. It's private property of the establishment. So no dissident talks too much about mass. They would rather talk about all these other concepts. And energy, because it's another form of mass, he doesn't emphasize that too much. He does talk a little bit about inertia. But as you can see by the number, he uses an incommensurable, vortex, and conjugate. He uses these fancy words that have no meaning, and they're not defined, as I'm going to show you in a second here in his book. But you can see at the bottom, dielectric and derivatives, dielectricity and so on. Oh, he loves that word. He's got it 1,600 times in there. Field, he's got half of that. And then ether, he's got 380, and counterspatial, 313. But it turns out counterspatial and ether in his language are synonyms. Okay, so he's got 700 there. And it turns out that ether, counterspatial, and dielectric are synonyms in his language. So he's got a total of 1,600 plus 700. He's got a total of 2,400 versions of dielectric, ether, and counterspatial against about 800 fields. So he's got 3 times as many instances of dielectric, ether, and counterspatial as he does of field. So you can see how he's going to drive his theory, and those are the words you have to look up. So the word I look up first is this word counterspatial, okay? And as you can see here, he says the ether cannot be in space. He says space is within the ether. And he goes through here, he never defines it, and by the time I got to page 54, I finally gave up. But it's important to see what he's saying there. Counter space is literally the space between space itself, and that contrasts against what he said at the beginning. And so I said, well, let's see if I can illustrate what good old Ken Wheeler is saying. Maybe we can get to the bottom of this. And so I decided to illustrate it, and here's the illustration. Okay? He says, the ether is counter space and cannot be in space. Rather, space is within the ether. That's on page 29. That's illustration number 1. You can see space is in or within or whatever the ether. Great. Whatever the ether is. Okay, now he says next, counter space is literally the space between space itself. That's number 2. Now ether is between the 2 spaces. It's no longer that the space is included within the ether. Now the next one, he says number 3, which says the ether, right? Which requires conjugate field forces to bring it into space. Now ether is in or within or into space. So you can see that through the pages, he goes into this contradiction. He doesn't have a slightest clue what he's saying. That's the issue. The issue, this guy's babbling. That's what he is. What do we call a person who babbles, who says nonsense? Well, we call him a what? A profoundly mentally retarded individual, and that's a technical term. Okay, that's psychiatry or psychology or whatever. Okay, so I look up the other word, the word dielectric. I'm saying, what is this? And so I go there, and he has all these dielectric instances. One of the, again, the most popular word probably in his book. And I finally got to page 18 and finally found some measure of an idea of what dielectric or dielectricity means. He says, is the ether under stress or strain? In other words, he's saying it's the ether under motion of some kind. That's what he's saying. That's a dynamic concept. What is he talking about? Well, he's talking about a jumping kangaroo, which I touched upon in previous videos. A kangaroo is a static object. It's the only object in the universe. When it's moving, now you're watching a movie. A jumping kangaroo is not a physical object. A kangaroo is an object, not a jumping kangaroo. And this guy does his physics with jumping kangaroos. That's the issue. He's saying dielectricity is a jumping kangaroo. So no, that doesn't work. Okay, and you got to get to the bottom of the ether. Obviously, he wants. You need to know what the ether, since everything is synonymous with ether. You want to know what the ether is. Okay, what is the ether? So I go in there and look up, what the ether is. Okay, and you can see the first thing is that an ether is a medium. He's got that all over his book. That it's a mediator. That's a medium. Okay, he's got it everywhere. And so it's some kind of medium. In fact, in the previous one, he said it's got a membrane. So I guess that's a medium. So we need to know what a medium is. Well, of course, good old Ken doesn't define what a medium is. So you got to try to figure out what it is. And so you look it up and you find out that the ether is also made of particles. Okay. He says, you can see there at the bottom, the cathode ray is not electrons, but actually corpuscles of the ether. And he talks about the gaseous ether is the seat of electrical phenomena. Okay, so when you get an idea, you say, okay, obviously the ether is made of particles. Is the ether finite or infinite? Well, it's both in his theory. There is nothing outside the ether. That's on page 28. You would think if there's nothing outside the ether, it would look like that first picture, like the infinite ether. Otherwise, you would have something surrounding the ether. Would be thought the fourth dimension, or whatever. I don't care what you surround it with, but it would be surrounded by some black stuff in this case. You want to make it red, make it red. Fine. But the issue is that either the ether is infinite or it's finite. In that first statement, he's saying if there's nothing outside the ether, then the ether is finite. And then he's got there the ether is brought into space. You see the ether is enclosed within space. And in number 3, it's against space. So it's, hitting against it. It's surface to surface. So you can see, again, the inconsistency. We have no idea whether the ether is finite or infinite. Not from his book, not from objectively looking at his book. It turns out the ether also has physical properties. Okay, and here it is. It says ether has pressure. It's compressibility of the ether. The ether can be polarized. It has stress and strain, and it can decelerate. And I assume somewhere I'm going to find that the ether also accelerates. So he's got all these, physical properties of the ether. Okay, so at this point you might say, well, he's invented a new language. And this is the language he's created, and that's how it differs from mine. See, if you look at his language, he talks about counter space, ether, dielectricity, incommensurable. He uses these words, conjugate. No need to use this language. Voidance, inertia, field. He never defines any of these terms. He just uses them. And I have a new language too. But see, look at my language. My language is, look, first I justify why we need something. Physics can only be done with something. Something is that which has shape, nothing that which doesn't. Distance, separation between objects, they're all concise, straightforward definitions. No one can say, well, I didn't understand that. I mean, if you want to dig in a little deeper, fine. But I mean, these definitions are straightforward. They're concise, they're to the point, they're at the beginning of the book. Okay, and so you can see that I attack this from a different angle. Okay, and so yeah, I mean, I got to distinguish these guys, and that's why I attack them. I attack them because science is not criticism, but I need to criticize these guys so that you can see a contrast. Otherwise, people say, well, Bill's just another dissident. He does the same thing as all these other guys. And a lot of people say, why don't you join the electric universe? Why don't you join, these dissidents? And no, these people are my biggest enemies because they are misleading intellectuals, intelligent laymen who rail against the establishment. And so if you rail against the establishment, you look for an alternative because these people feel powerless. They say, look at all this math stuff out there, and it's all idiocy. Sorry, what is it, advanced mental retardation, whatever. Profound, profound mental retardation. And they look for an alternative. And they go and they find the electric universe, they find the John Chapel Society, and they find all these loose cannons out there. And they say, Bill, you're just like them. No, no, absolutely not. I am this different than all of them because I do it with objects. And I define what physics is, I define what an object is, and then I start using these things. And I use objects to do my as my mediators for electricity, for gravity, for magnetism, for light. These people don't. These people use concepts. That's where they fall in the same boat as the mainstream. There's no difference between them. They use the same language as mainstream. The word energy, field, vortex, plasma, all those are from the mainstream. They don't like other words like space-time or black hole, but they're still using the other words of mathematical physics. And these words have been around, almost all of them, from the time of Newton and even before that. And I'm saying that we have to erase the board all the way from the Greeks all the way to today. We got to erase it all completely. We have to erase it all because these people are moving concepts. We don't do physics with concepts. We don't do physics with vortex. We don't do physics with waves. We don't do physics with field or with energy. Those are not words of physics. That's where I contrast against these people, and that's why I criticize them online so that people are aware that there is a distinction between them and me. Okay? So even though science is not about criticism, I need to raise the criticism to create a contrast so that you can see what I'm proposing in exchange to all of these other people, all of them. And with that, I'll see you, when is it? On Sunday. And hopefully I'll see some of you in Zambia. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.